Hi, my name is Cameron Byrne, General Manager of Partnerships here at the AFA. I'm very excited to introduce you to today's webinar titled FASEA Exam Tips, Tricks and Test Your Knowledge, brought to you in partnership with TAFE New South Wales. Our presenters today are Diana Bagasic and Nancy Mikhail. Diana has over 25 years' experience in banking and financial service sectors, having joined TAFE New South Wales 13 years ago after a 10-year career at Qantas Airways in the Treasury Department. As one of the Treasury risk managers, Diana was responsible for the risk management and trading of Qantas's large foreign exchange portfolio. At TAFE New South Wales, Diana is responsible for the higher education financial planning courses, CPD and commercial delivery. And Nancy. Nancy has over 20 years industry experience in the accounting and finance sector, with the last 10 years focused on education within the vocational and higher education areas within TAFE New South Wales. In today's webinar, you'll hear lots of useful information such as time management for study planning and exam preparation techniques, which will especially be useful for those AFA members who will be returning to study shortly. Before we begin, I'd just like to cover off some webinar housekeeping. As a webinar attendee, you are on mute during the webinar. We have allowed for some time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature, not the chat feature, as you can see in the diagram on the slide. Today's webinar will be recorded and available on demand on the AFA website. Diana and Nancy, thank you for putting this important information together for our members. Let's kick off.
Hi, I'm Nancy.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana and we're really proud to be presenting this webinar for you today in conjunction with the AFA. It's going to be a little bit informal and Nancy and I will share the presentation together and just flip through some of the slides. So some key information for you. Over 12,000 advisors have already passed the exam, which represents over 57% of advisors on the FAR register. 89% of advisors have passed, irrespective of how many times they've sat the exam. So that's some really good news and should allay some of your fears, particularly with advisors scheduled to sit the exam coming up now at the end of March. 73%, and this is just some statistics straight off the FASEA website, 73% of candidates sitting the exam for the first time passed the January exam, which is a slightly lower than the average over the last 12 months. 46% of advisors who have resat the exam passed on their second attempt, which again is just a slightly little bit lower than advisors previously who have resat. And I would just take this little bit of data away for those of you who are resitting, just to consider perhaps doing some additional practice exams and just to pay attention to some of the knowledge areas that FASEA have actually published in terms of where they found advisors might need a little bit more help. Some other stats, 60% of candidates passed the January exam, compared with 78% across all the exams, and 1,079 advisors sat that January exam. Just a reminder too that the exam's marked to a credit standard and that does vary slightly with each exam. And the main point is that over 13,000, well nearly 13,500 advisors have sat that exam, which represents 9 in 10 advisors that actually understand and can demonstrate that they have the knowledge and skills to apply to those 3 main knowledge areas that that the exam is actually testing. So really well done and good on you. So in relation to some other key exam information, it costs $540 obviously plus GST. If you're unsuccessful on the first attempt, and this is why it's really important to make sure that you've registered and you leave yourself enough time, just in case you don't receive that pass mark on your first sitting, you're actually locked out for the next cycle, which means that there's really 3 months between your first sitting date and when you're able to resit at the next time. So the main tip that Nancy and I really want to put across to you today is to sit the exam as soon as possible. And at this stage, there's only 5 exam sittings left. Some of those dates, these are published straight off the FASEA website, is that the next sitting is sitting 12, which is in May, and the booking period is actually open now. So if you went onto the FASEA website and you haven't booked in for an exam yet, book in for this sitting 12, which means that you'll be sitting the exam sometime towards the end of May, and you're giving yourself enough time to prepare and be ready. So what you need to do on the day of the FASEA exam, once you've registered, and obviously I'm not an advisor, so I can't register on the website and be a candidate. However, if you register, there's a lot of additional material now that FASEA have published and are giving a lot more feedback. So one of the other tips to take away from today is to please have a look at the FASEA website. I'm constantly astounded by some of the questions that I get asked regarding candidates who have never actually logged onto the FASEA website to see the resources, the videos. They're constantly updating their latest exams and providing sample exam questions with answers. So that goes a long way to supporting you and giving you a bit of an indication as to the style of the questions. You will need, once you attend the exam, and that can be either in person or online, you need to take in the booking receipt, which must be a hard copy, not a photo on your phone, for example. Take in 2 pieces of ID. Ensure you give yourself, one of the things that we find with all students is, and it's normal behaviour, is that you get really nervous on the day. That's normal. Please don't add to your nerves by being late. Get in there really early. You'll be given some paper to write down your login details and a pen, and you do get access to the online resources, which is the statutory material to be able to access online. However, again, just a little tip, don't think that because you've got access to material that it's going to be necessarily easy to navigate. Well, it is easy. I think it's easy to navigate. However, it might take you time that you don't necessarily have to double check yourself. So my advice would be to only use those resources as a last resort if you actually needed to check the legislation or look up a FASEA code, for example. You're not permitted to have mobile phones, other equipment. Obviously, internet access is banned. We have heard stories that you're not allowed watches, particularly electronic watches. And on the bottom of this slide, we've actually got a link to the exam policy that outlines it in more detail. And FASEA have actually also posted a video regarding the exam process and what it looks like. So we encourage you to have a look at all of that. And over to Nancy now.
The exam is a required component of the education standard that all advisors need to take. Existing advisors are required to pass this exam before the 1st of January 2022. Part of this exam, there are 33 learning outcomes that the exam could cover, but you all need to know these 33 learning outcomes. These 33 learning outcomes are split into 3 particular areas, which are financial advice, regulatory and legal requirements, which looks at the Corporations Act, Anti-Money Laundering, Privacy Act, the Tax Agent Services Act. It also looks at the financial advice construction and applied ethical and professional reasoning and communication. And this includes the FASEA Code of Ethics and Code of Monitoring Bodies. This slide just is a guide that FASEA has on their website. biggest advice is that you really need to look at the FASEA website, as Diana has stated. It has a lot of information there to support advisors sitting the exam. And this is like a preparation guide which looks at what each section entails, which is like the previous slide has stated. What we did here is we took the 33 learning outcomes and thought we would split them into particular areas to give you kind of like a mind map of looking at how much time would I need to study in each of these areas. So if I have a look at the first one, 33%, which means 33% of the 33 learning outcomes comes from the ASIC and Corpus law. 18% comes from the FASEA Standard Authority or the Code of Ethics. 13% is from the financial advice construction. 24 is in relation to ethics, and 12 is in relation to client and consumer behaviour. Now, this shows you how much time you need to spend studying in those areas. And you can see that the major areas are the ASICs and Corpus law and the ethics. And this will help guide, if I'm going to sit the May exam, I'm starting to study now, how much time do I need to spend over that period of time?
And just have a think about also as a reminder, as advisors, some of these content areas are rather new. For example, behavioural finance. This hasn't been an area that you've had to, for example, study before, particularly if you've come from a diploma of financial planning or an advanced diploma of financial planning. We're all very much aware of our regulatory obligations. However, Chapter 7, if anyone's had a look at Chapter 7, I mean, it's pretty much, an encyclopedia, and is trying to decipher what sections in Chapter 7 actually apply to me as an advisor. And some of those areas might be things that your licensee does or that your compliance manager looks after. But as an advisor sitting this exam, the onus is on you to be aware of some of those legal responsibilities and obligations that your compliance manager might look after on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the actual FASEA exam and how it's split up. So it's 3.5 hours and you've got 15 minutes reading time. There are 70 questions in the exam, and these questions are split up into multiple choice. Multiple choice questions are A to D. They're worth 1 mark each. Then you've got some true or false questions, and then some written responses or case style questions where you might need to provide a short response, 1 or 2, depending on the marks allocated to that part of the question. The key thing here is to actually look at your marks, because the marks allocated here will actually tell you how much time you need to spend on there. Questions are will be equally split between the 3 areas that we discussed previously. A key tip here, marks are awarded for the correct answer. So you don't lose marks for answering something incorrect. So don't feel that if you don't know the answer that you can't answer that question. Answer every single question, attempt everything. What you could do, another tip is, and I'll go through that in a little bit, answer the questions that you know, because you can always go back to, and I'll show you how you can do that, to answer the questions that you don't know. As Diana stated before, the exams will be marked to a credit level. That means to pass, you need to achieve between 65 to 74 to pass that exam.
So you can't get half wrong, right? It's not 50%.
So what we're saying is, at a bare minimum, what you need to review is the FASEA have published all the curriculum framework that you need to read, recommended reading lists and practice questions. That is the bare minimum that you need to do before sitting an exam. The other thing is the exam guide. Yeah, the exam preparation guide has some practice questions, and they update this on a regular basis. So you know, the key thing is always going back to that FASEA website, having a look at what they've published, what's new, what have I missed. The exam video or candidate video is really helpful because it just puts you at ease on what the exam will look like, what you need to know, how to navigate. That just saves time when you get into the exam because you're already comfortable and aware of what it looks like.
And the other tip is when you go to have a look at those exam prep questions, for example, that FASEA have already published, it's really easy to read the question and have the answer in front of you and go, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense because the answer's there. However, I encourage you to actually undertake those questions without looking at the answers under real exam conditions to test yourself. The other thing you could do, particularly for students that need some practice in sitting exams, is have another set of the same questions that FASEA have published, but change the names and change the order of the questions around, and then test yourself and actually go, okay, if I change the names and the scenario, would I get the same answer? Thinking that it's got a different set of clients in that scenario. Just a little tip.
So begin studying. The key thing that Di and I can only say is prepare, prepare, prepare. Please do it as early as possible. If you think that you could do it a couple of days before the exam, there's too much to get through. Read the FASEA material, summarize, make notes. Look, every one of us learn in a different manner. So if it's a visual learning, use diagrams, use mind maps. If you rather hear things, record yourself and listen to it. If you think that studying in a group is a better way, then get together and try and form some group work and test yourselves, work through the reading material. Plan it. Say, I've got from this date to this date. I've got 8 weeks before the exam. I've got all these materials I need to do. I'm going to do an hour every evening. And towards a week before the exam, I'm then going to go and spend 2 hours an evening and some on Saturday to get through the material that I need to know. As Di said, even though you're given the statutory material in the exam, if you think you can read the question and have time to search for the exam, search for the answer, you will not have enough time. You might think that 3.5 hours is a lot of time to be able to answer 70 questions, but it's not. The time actually flies. So you need to actually prepare and understand where certain sections are, say in the Corps Act, where do I go if I'm answering this question? You can look up the material, but make sure you know where everything is.
Yeah, and my tip would be to spend about 2 minutes maximum on those multiple choice questions. If you need to spend more than 2 minutes, flag the question, go back to it if you have time. Well, you need to set yourself some time to go back.
Time management.
Time management is critical, and if you still don't know at the end and you've only got a couple of minutes left, is just pretty much
go in there and just guess, because you're not going to get marked wrong, but you're definitely going to get marked wrong if you leave the question that you could have got right.
Yeah, blank. So some weakness areas that FASEA published regarding the January exam and that were underperformed, and this is categorised in curriculum areas. And again, this is straight off the FASEA website, is under financial advice and your legal obligations as an advisor, is to understand how different types of advice, i.e. the difference between personal advice, general advice, am I giving factual information, is it an opinion, and how that differs in different client situations. Can you demonstrate knowledge of the different components of some key advice documentation? And in this example, FASEA specifically have spelled out financial services guides, statements of advice. Think about your product disclosure statements. They're all key pieces of advice documentation that you need to be providing to your clients. Can you apply the relevant sections of the Corps Act when you need to identify your obligations as an advisor, including what are some of the breaches or some of the sanctions, for example, that might be imposed if you breach these obligations. So it's not only knowing what the FASEA code is, but also how Chapter 7 applies and what some of those breaches might be if you Yeah, if you do the wrong thing, which hopefully none of you do. Some other weakness areas, particularly around applied ethical and professional reasoning, is to be able to demonstrate practical application of what due diligence means in financial advice, identifying sources of judgment and biases. So, for example, do you have a bias specifically towards a client? You might not even realise that you do. How to apply the best interest duty and the associated ethical obligations in providing financial advice, and effectively applying the FASEA code to client scenarios. So, for example, the FASEA code, standard 3 could apply to every question. Standard 1, all ethical obligations. You can't circumvent any of them. So you might want to state standard 1 as a response in some of those questions. But it is the best answer. And that's with any exam. There might be 1 or 2 responses or answers that are relatively close, but it's always the best response, and one is better than the other. And that's why it's important that you know the details of the code of Chapter 7, not just a broad understanding. And in terms of financial advice construction, that you understand the context in what that advice is given and how it might impact decision making. So, for example, think about your clients. You might be giving advice today. How does that impact in the long term? Does it impact anybody else other than the person that's sitting in front of you? Do they have, beneficiaries? How does the advice that you're giving potentially impact others? So some other areas that you need to know, particularly think about what's been happening in current events, particularly around anti-money laundering, casinos, cash. Have a good understanding of the anti-money laundering legislation. And we've just put up a little poster from
some summaries.
A summary about some of the different red flags that you should be aware of, and that might make you question the motives or where the funds have come from. Again, TASA applies to financial advisors, the Tax Practitioners Board, so you need to have an understanding of the Code of Professional Conduct as it applies to you as a tax financial advisor, and also the Australian Privacy Principles. Do you understand how privacy works when you're giving advice, or if you're collecting information, and who you might be able to give that information to? So it's really, these are 3 areas that sometimes get missed.
Overlooked.
Yeah, or overlooked, as Nancy said.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go through the exam, like navigating what it looks like. Again, everybody is nervous. Everyone is feeling anxious. I think.
And if you weren't anxious and you didn't have butterflies on the day, oops, that's even worse. If you've got butterflies, then that's a good thing.
And what we're saying is that everybody's going through it. So you're not the only one. And I kind of have a view that if everyone else can get through it, I can get through it too. And having that attitude and positive attitude walking into the exam will get you through it. Key tips is some of the advisors are not reading the question carefully. You're skimming through it or overlooking key words or concepts. Like some of the questions may be asking you to provide an example, right? What is a recommendation? Or what advice would you give? So clearly have a look at it and go, what are the key things that I need to address when answering this question? Put yourself, if it's a case study question, put yourself as if you are that advisor. What would you do? How would you answer it?
Don't overthink the questions either. You might think that, we get that all the time in some of our exams. Students overthink the question, think, oh, this is too easy. Well, then it might be too easy. That just means you've prepared and you know the answer. don't overthink the questions, and generally your first gut response is generally the correct response. It's only when you start to second guess yourself that you get all caught up in knots.
And the key thing, as I said before, when you're looking at the case study questions, they may be asking for 2 concerns, 2 issues, 2 actions. So if you write 1, you're not going to get the full marks, right? If you write 4, you're not going to get an extra 2 marks, right? Just address what the question is asking. And the key thing is when you're answering these case study questions, 1, relate it back to legislation if you can. And 2, once you've related it back to legislation, then relate it back to the scenario. How in this scenario does it relate to the section that you've just quoted? Okay, you can't just grab sections from, say, the Courts Act and put it in and expect to get full marks, because you're not going to. Okay, you've addressed it half, you've only given a section, but how does that relate to the specific question? What are they asking for?
And don't think you can trick the markers either by rewriting the question as the answer. That's always really obvious when we get students who you can tell they don't actually know the answer because they've just rewritten the question. So try not to do that. Actually come up with an example and demonstrate that you actually understand the practical application of what the question's asking you.
Now the next part, if you have a look at the screen, it's the navigation where it's got questions 1, 3 and end. Obviously you'll have the 70 questions, for example, on the top of the screen. The dark colour where number 1 is, it states that you have completed that question. So any dark shaded questions shows that you've actually answered the question. Number 3 is where you currently are. But if you have a look at number 2, it's not shaded, it's still white. So that means that you actually haven't answered that question. And the good thing about that is, as we stated before, if you don't know it, don't waste time on it. It'll sit there as white. You can always go back to it and address it later. And that's how you can actually do it. That navigation tool is on the top of your screen during the exam. Again, key tips, don't over answer the questions. Don't read more into it, as Diana said. Don't dump information in there. That's not going to get you the marks that you need. Time manage. So we kind of go answer all the easy questions first, because that'll also make you feel a bit more relaxed. You can do this.
And you might have a different exam strategy. So for example, we find some students might like to address all the multiple choice questions to get them out of the way. Or you might find, okay, the case studies, they're worth more marks. So my exam strategy is going to be to start with them first. So everybody's different. Don't be concerned as to, you know, what someone else's exam strategy is. Go in with a purpose and understanding of how you're going to start, and watch that clock.
And don't forget, you've got the 15 minutes reading time where you can figure out what you're going to do. You can have some time to go through each part and go, yes, and now I know what it's kind of like. I know how I feel about some questions. Yes, I'm going to attempt this first, do that. Don't forget, you've got a piece of paper where you can write things. You actually can't write during the reading time. So you're going to have to wait until the start time, but you can actually get yourself organised to be able to address the questions straight away. If you're feeling a little bit stressed during the exam, just stop. You know, breathing is the key technique to bringing you back into it, getting rid of that stress kind of feeling. Start again. So it's, you know, they say breathe through your nose for 4 seconds, hold for 4, breathe out. Just repeat that a couple of times. I'm not sure how many of you will actually be sitting the actual exam at ASA, but it's stated that it can get a little bit noisy by people typing on the keyboard. So imagine everybody typing. So they do provide you with some earplugs if you go to the exam. So use that so you're fully concentrating on the exam. If you're doing the exam online, they use a system called PROCTORU. where they will have someone supervising you online. And what they will actually do before the exam is ask you to show your room. So they'll make you actually spin everything around to make sure you've got nothing on your desk, nothing on the walls around. And if you do, they'll actually ask you to remove it, look at it again, and they will supervise you online through the whole time. Again, if you are doing it online, please make sure you're logged on and ready to go way before the exam starts, half an hour, 40 minutes. Just have it there, be ready. This is just kind of like I did a little roadmap of how kind of to read or answer a question. So read the question carefully. If it's too long, then look at the key points both in the question and the case study at the same time, so you know what you're going to have to address. Another phase 2, if you're able to answer the question without looking at the resources, and I'll show you where the resources are during the exam in a moment, then answer the question, because that'll save you time later on when you need to spend to research or spend it. If you think that I'm looking at this case study for too long, then just stop, okay, and come back to it. Make a note of the question, even though you can still see it on your navigation bar. You can make some quick notes on a piece of paper so you don't have to relook at the question. You know what it's asking for, then come back to it. Key things that we stated before: identify the correct legislation, the section, and then once you've done that, map it back to the scenario, okay? You guys all know the majority of this stuff. Feel comfortable to say, I am an advisor, I know what I'm doing, I can do this. This is what I would do in this scenario. Okay, so this is just what a multiple choice question would look like. You're given a scenario here, which you should read. And then if you have a look up here, and a lot of people are missing this, there's actually another tab sitting there, and that has section 961E. So advice, read the case study, read the question, and then click on this tab to see what additional information is actually stated there. So that's just what it looks like. Again, it's showing you that it's got question 1, you can't see it, so question 1, and that's what you're attempting because it's in blue. Reading time means I'm still in my 15-minute block. I can't actually answer anything, but I can still read the questions. That's how a multiple choice question is set out on there. Again, all of this information is on the FASEA website. I got this information from watching the video in preparation of the exam. Now, this is the area up here. It says open book resources. This is the only way you will be able to access the resources that you need for the exam. So what I would do is actually, once you're allowed reading time, once you start, have a look at what it is so you're familiar with which order everything's at. And you can actually see that when you're watching the video. This is where you need to go if you need to look up a section or you need to look up for something for the tax agent services. Just click on it. It'll appear. And I think on my next slide, oh no. What you do is once you click here, for example, it will bring up the Corporations Act, and you'll have a little search tab where you can write, for example, section whatever it is on there, and it will bring up that information. And that's how you'll actually find the resources on there. So what we're going to do now is test your knowledge.
Are you ready?
What we're going to do is I'm going to read out some questions, and we're going to put it up through the poll where you have some time to actually answer the question, and then we will go through it. So let's begin. So that's the first question. Okay, question number 1. If a statement of advice...
Oh yeah, good. The poll's up.
Okay. If a statement of advice is found to be defective, the affected person, example, retail client, might take what action against the providing entity and authorising AFS licensee? 1, is it civil action? B, criminal action? C, both civil and criminal action? Or D, refer complaint to code monitoring body of criminal action and suspension?
Oh, this is really interesting. They're all flipping between A and D.
Keep them coming.
Glad no one's got criminal action, because you're not going to go to jail if you give it a defective SOA.
We're nearly there. Few more
Very
responses.
interesting answers.
Okay, a few more.
Looks like it's a bit neck and neck with A and D.
Again. Okay. All right, so the answer is, are you ready? The answer actually is A, civil action, okay? The key hint is your Chapter 7 Corps Act and ASIC RG 175216 provides for civil action against the providing entity for any loss or damages. Key thing is, when I put up the next question, let's have a look at the key words that they're asking for you to look at. So let's go to the next question. Question 2. Okay, which of the following provided by a financial advisor constitutes financial product advice?
And this is just one of the examples that FASEA specifically acknowledged was a bit of a weakness.
Okay, A, referral to a financial advisor to another licensee for specific insurance advice. B, advice regarding home building, home contents insurance product. C, tax advice regarding the purchase of an investment property within an SMSF. And the last one, advice regarding a managed investment fund. I've got 39 responses.
Well done on this one. Yeah, this looks pretty good. Obviously, all the advisors on this webinar today know the difference between providing general advice or what does constitute financial product advice. So well done. It's nearly 100%. And like Nancy and I were saying before, all of these could potentially be correct because you're familiar with the terms. For example, home building, home contents, insurance. But there's a key as to why that one isn't financial product advice.
Okay, so the answer is D. Well done. You guys have done really well. 91% answered D. And it's because basically a managed investment fund is considered a financial product, whereas a home and contents insurance isn't, and neither is the property. So well done. That's fantastic.
And obviously referring an advisor to another advisor is not giving advice.
Okay, let's have a look at question 3, which I'll just go to. Okay, this is a bit of a long one.
And a bit of a tricky one.
So, Jonathan is an authorised representative of an Australian Financial Services licensee. An organisation, Tree Splicers Pty Ltd, applies to receive a designated service from Jonathan. With the company structure and shareholder list on the annual return submitted to the Australian Securities Investment Commission is as follows. So we've got Abbas at 58, Bartram at 22, Pinchy at 20. Pinchy is the general manager and is the guru who administers all the aspects of the company. Which of the following scenarios would be applicable to Jonathan with regard to his requirements to the customer's due diligence obligation under the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Act 2006. So this question is asking for some true and false statements. So can we go to the poll? You need to answer true or false for each of these statements. Question 1, collecting and verifying customer identification information. Is it true or false? Undertaking number 2, a verification of the banking financier and the company uses. True or false? And the last one, identifying whether a customer is an immediate family member of a politically exposed person, PEP. You guys are doing really well. Look at that change. Get your responses in, it's looking good. Nearly there. I think the first one, everyone's got their definite answer. It's 2 and 3.
And I mean, in terms of us picking questions, we've tried to pick questions from a variety of the different knowledge areas that FASEA are examining. And some of the questions are exactly what FASEA have got published. We've just changed the names and the scenario, which is what you can do.
So brilliant. For question 1, 97% said true. That's true. You are required under legislation to collect and verify customer identification information. Question 2 is false. Financial institution information is actually not required under legislation. And C, it's true, it's required under legislation, CCD obligation. Fantastic, you guys have done really well. Okay, question 4.
Second last one.
In time critical situations, which of the following is the most appropriate course of action for a financial advisor to take? Now, before I read the answers out, the key word here for me to take, or for you guys to take, is the most appropriate course of action. Okay? A, provide the clients with a statement of advice explaining the strategy prior to implementation of that advice. B, provide the advice verbally, then confirm the advice with a formal written file note on the same day. C, provide the advice verbally, then follow up with written advice documentation within 5 days. D, provide the advice immediately and confirm in writing with a record of advice within 7 business days.
Oh, pretty good.
Let's see. We're getting the answers through.
And I think this is a really good example where if you know the answer, because we can see some responses coming through really quickly, where if you definitely know the answer, get it in, move on to the next one if these were real exam conditions. As we said, use your gut.
You know it.
You know the answer. Yeah. So don't overthink it, put it in,
just
move
be
to the next
careful
one.
With what the question is actually asking.
So a couple more seconds.
Brilliant. Obviously, the answer is C. 81% of you responded with that. Provide the advice verbally, then follow up with written advice documentation within 5 days. And that's in the Corps Act under section 946C.
Just another tip, especially because this just came to my mind because the answer's C. And I think all of us, I don't know where we got this, whether it's in high school or in our uni days, where, you know, the old wives' tale was, if in doubt, choose C. Let me tell you that is not a good idea, because even when Nancy and I, for example, we write exams for our students, if we've got too many C's, we'll change it. just to make sure that every single question, the answer is different. So it might, you know, the answer might be A, C, D, E. And if they happen to be all in a row and we notice, oh, hang on a second, for some reason we've picked A or C to B, the answer, you know, for a couple of them, we change it. So don't think that C is going to be the answer if you're unsure.
Okay. So
last question.
Last question, question 5. Okay, Standard 8 of the FASEA Code of Ethics requires that a financial advisor keep complete and accurate records of the advice and services provided. Jenny has completed her Masters in Financial Planning and can now specialise in securities and derivatives, and will be leaving her current employer and joining a new licensee. Which of the following is correct regarding maintenance of her files? Okay, what is the question asking for? Okay, let's have a look. Jenny must retain a personal copy of client files for a minimum of 7 years. Jenny's employer must retain all client files for a minimum of 7 years dating from the last contact with the client. C, Jenny's employer must retain Jenny's client files for 7 years from the date she exits the practice. Or D, Jenny's records keeping obligations end when Jenny hands all her files back to the client. So when you're answering this question, have a look at it. What is it asking in relation? What do we need to do with client files? Or what does Jenny need to do, or the employer need to do with the client files? So we've got halfway there. If you need a few more responses in.
And you can see in this example, we've specifically picked securities and derivatives. And that might be a bit of a red herring, it might not be. But at the end of the day, regardless of what area of financial advice you give, your record keeping obligations are all the same.
Nearly there.
Nancy, overall, most of these responses have been pretty good.
I think they've done really well.
Obviously, everyone's been practicing for the upcoming March exam.
Nearly there. Couple of more seconds. There we go. The answer is B, and the majority of you did state that. That is fantastic. The hint here was that Standard 8 deals with client files, and ASIC imposes obligations on the licensees regarding their record keeping obligations in relation to personal advice provided to retail clients. The employer, this is the key, is required to retain all of Jenny's clients from the last date to the contact with the client. Okay, fantastic. You guys did really well. So with all the additional information that you're given on the FASEA website, TAFE New South Wales also, we have created a course and also a practice exam, which is 3.5 hours to give you that experience of sitting that exam. Okay, so some advice is you do all your study and then you attempt this exam to give you, I guess, an understanding or an idea of how much do I know, how much more do I need to prepare, am I ready? So if you'd like details, it's actually listed on the bottom of this PowerPoint. It will help you identify your gaps. So I think it's time for questions.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Diana. So a couple of key takeouts from me on that one, and you've heard it from two extremely qualified professional educators. Do not choose option C. And something else to take into account is, as we've all, learned throughout our careers, preparation is key. Don't leave it to the last minute to try and get through it thinking based on your knowledge. So I'll now go through some of the questions that are coming through, and I'll open it to Nancy and Diana to cover off. First question, can you write things down on the scratch paper during the 15 minutes of reading time?
My understanding is no. You can't. Reading time is just reading time.
We actually haven't done the exam, not being advisors. I'm not sure if there's anybody else.
I think it was on the video though.
Yeah. But you can't. And generally when you have reading time, I mean, even at university, when we undertake invigilated exams, reading time is purely reading, can't pick up a pen.
Thank you. Next question. What if I don't pass the exam by January 2022? What happens?
You're considered a new entrant, which means if you're considered a new entrant, you have to go through the professional year and undertake the education standards as it applies to a new entrant. Have a look at the FASEA website.
And that's why it's really key to take the opportunity and do the exam now to give yourself time just in case.
So for example, if you've got an advanced diploma of financial planning and you're on the FAR register, you'll get 2 subjects as uphill in a graduate diploma of financial planning. Next year, if you don't pass the exam, you're considered a new entrant, no RPL for your advanced diploma. So it's pretty serious.
Thank you. Next question, and this may not be able to be answered given you haven't sat the exam. Do we have the ability to use Control F function in the exam for statutory research?
Yes.
Okay.
Probably answered on one of the videos.
Yes.
Next question, doesn't the Corps Act state 5 days, not necessarily 5 business days?
No,
I'm not sure what particular area or question that's relating to from the presentation. That's just what the question is.
We get asked this question all the time. Nancy's the expert, yeah. And yeah, it depends, it's the 5 or 7 days depends on the scenario.
I think it does section 946C. So look up section 946C of the Corps Act. So I'll do that while you guys go to the next question.
Thank you.
We haven't had this one asked before.
So we'll throw this question to Diana while Nancy finds that answer. I failed the first time. Why don't we get any feedback or so little feedback?
Look, I'm really not sure. That's for FASEA and I think ASA as the exam administrators. From looking at some of their announcements, they are providing a lot more feedback and targeted feedback to the candidates that are sitting now. I would imagine that they may recycle some of their questions, and that's probably why they're not providing feedback. We recycle our questions, for example, when in our exams. Most universities do. It's actually quite difficult to come up with a bank of questions. But the fact that they've got them there, use them.
And that would go further to the point of why they don't provide a copy of the exam, which was a secondary part to that question.
The fact that I think, I like from memory, I think if we think back to say, 9 months ago, FASEA might have published, five questions. I think there's probably at least 15 or 20 questions that they have published now, and your different formats, your multiple choice, short answer, case study. And it gives advisors a really good indication of the style of question, which is really important to understand the style of question, how to answer and why that answer was correct, particularly as they're all around a case study. They're all based on a scenario.
Thank you. Next question, how does the floating pass mark work? With the January exam, the pass rate was lower. Does that mean the pass mark was higher or was it lower pass mark to other exams?
I don't think we can really state that. What we can only state is that, you know, they achieve a credit level between whatever I stated, 65 to 74.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of, my understanding from, again, reading from the FASEA publication, is that they undertake a lot of statistical analysis and they've got a bank of questions that they can benchmark across the different cohorts to make sure that they're all being marked to the same standard, which is why that pass mark may vary slightly.
Yeah, thank you. Couple of questions here, which I know we've covered off. Where can we obtain the link for the practice exam?
The TAFE New South Wales one? Yeah, even if you just Google TAFE New South Wales, you know, FASEA exam, we've got a special on for AFA members where you get a 10% discount if you want. We have a, this is Nancy's area, but that's probably why she forgot to mention it. We actually have a course that takes you through all of these knowledge areas, and at the end of that course, you do the practice exam as well. There's a 10% special for AFA members. Or you can just undertake our practice exam, which is, as Nancy mentioned, 3.5 hours. Once you finish that exam, you've got, I think, a week to be able to review. Yeah, and it gives you the correct answer. So you can actually use that as a bit of a testing point as well.
Thank you. Do we actually need 2 forms of ID? I think that's the answer to that one is yes. I'll take that one off.
Have a look on the FASEA website, it actually states it.
Yep. Another question that we've covered off during the presentation in some detail, can you sit the exams back to back? I know that was early on in the presentation, so no, you can't. You need to miss the next session. So hence it's important to make sure you book in now to give yourself as much time to pass for this year.
So everyone, I mean, that's our biggest hint is make sure you book in for the next sitting date, because if for whatever unforeseen reason you fail, at least if you're locked out for the next 2, you'll get one more opportunity in.
Is there a cost to do the FASEA practice exam through TAFE?
Yes, there is. Yep.
It's, I think it is
$199, but less the 10% discount.
Yeah, it's $199. It's pretty cheap, guys.
Thank you. How much study do we do regarding biases?
Oh, good question. It depends. Look, at the end of the day, I think it depends where you're coming from and how much you know already. So that's really difficult.
And go through the learning outcomes to identify how much of that is under that area, and then have a look. Do I know that? Do I not know that? That will determine. Everyone's different.
Next question, why is this exam so secretive? The feedback is very generalised and you don't get your result, let alone the pass mark.
I don't think that's something
I don't know.
We can't answer that, unfortunately.
Ask FASEA.
If you do the practice exam, we'll give you feedback, but that's about it.
Ask FASEA.
Another question's come through regarding the sitting of the exam, which we've covered off if you file one and sitting the next one. Another question, the link will be in the presentation for the TAFE courses and the practice exam, so that's okay. We'll go through that one. I heard that you are still considered an experienced advisor if you're registered as an advisor from the 19th of January 2019. Isn't that correct?
I'd have to check. If you were, there's a time frame where you had to be on the FAR register. I'm pretty sure that was until the end of 2019.
Thank you.
But again, if anyone wants, oh, sorry, Cameron, if anyone has some questions about what RPL or their education, where they fit in, how much they have to do, are they on the register? We can undertake that for you. So just send us an email or go through the AFA if you need some support. So we do a lot of that.
I think just additionally, it's not just the exam that TAFE is doing. We're doing the ethics unit, the grade deep, grade cert. So if you need any additional information, just touch base with us.
Yeah, so just in the essence of time, we are running really close to the deadline. So unfortunately, we're not going to get to the questions during this session, but we'll get them communicated out. So today's webinar recording and presentation slides will be available online at the AFA website shortly. That's been a few questions. You'll receive an email confirming when this is available. And today's webinar has also provided you with one CPD hour available, and we'll send out the details within the next week. So Diana and Nancy, thank you very much for your time today. I'm sure our listeners have received a lot of value from all of the useful information you've delivered around preparing for the FASEA exam. To all our listeners today, thank you for taking the time to register and to be with us for this webinar today. We appreciate you supporting our AFA webinar program. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Good luck, everyone. Bye.